What up, fam? Y'all just got here? What's good with you? Thank you for tuning in and supporting the podcast, man. I appreciate you guys. And I'm just moving this up a little bit, let you see me. What's going on, y'all? Listen, this episode of the podcast is a serious episode for me because the truth is, if you are not where you want to be in this podcast space or on your videos, your content creation space, on your platforms, and all of that, bottom line, what I'm finding is you're just being outworked. We're being outworked. I know I'm being outworked and I can't stand it, but what can we do about it? I know exactly what we could do about it. We can get to work, y'all. We got to get to work, y'all, because we are being outworked. And, where do you get the time, right? Where am I getting the time? I'm watching my fellow podcasters in the space that I'm in. They are getting massively big. Like they're growing. Their platforms are growing. People are paying attention. And I'm saying, man, what's happening with my platform, right? And the bottom line is this. It's simple. Excuse that, but the bottom line is this. It's simple. I'm being outworked. And I don't like being outworked. So because I don't like being outworked, I'm in the game. Full skin in the game. I know, listen, the reality of it all is that, yes, indeed, I am being outworked, and now I'm trying to find the time, or I'm working towards the time to just bring you guys a better podcast, bring you guys better content, bring you guys my reality, because I had a reality check, and that reality check just kind of it is what it is, right? You have to switch something up. So I had to switch something up about what I'm doing. I had to get behind this camera a lot more in terms of just being here on YouTube. If you come on YouTube and you post it on YouTube, eventually you will find traction, but not until. If you have been posting 10 times a day, 5 times a day, 3 times a day, once a day, once every 2 days, once every 3-4 days, once a week, then you can expect to grow. That's just it's nonsense. Think about the competition. Think about the people that are hungrier than you are. Yeah, man. That is actually the reason for the episode today, because there are just some people that are just a lot hungrier than you are, than I was, right? And because of that, their channels grew, their following grew, their communities grow, and their communities grow stronger and stronger and stronger because of the one thing that every creator has to be, and that is the C, capital C, consistent. If we are not consistent, how can we expect to grow? Some of us are, we have these blocks in terms of content creation. We don't know what to create. We don't know how to create it. Now I've posted 2 or 3 times today. What else could I possibly post? I say the same thing. I know it. I say the same thing for myself. I'm like, even today, I was like, well, what else could I actually post? Right? After posting a couple of real estate things that I've got into, right? Because I went and viewed and toured property. And because that's what I do. I sell real estate. I went out and I ran this morning. I got my exercise in with the dog, which is something that I do every single day. And every night I go out and I take a walk. And I decided to start recording and, maybe having that cut up and diced and edited. And then I bring it to my shorts. And my shorts seem to grow a lot more than my long form videos, right? And I wonder why that is. And that's the question that I'm posing to you guys. Why is it that the short term content grows a lot more, a lot faster than the long-term content, right? They said to me, you got to go over to YouTube and post your long-term videos, like your interviews with your guest, because people get to know who you are that way. They get to see your personality, they get to see how you move, they get to see the kind of questions you're asking, they get to see how your mind works, right? Which sometimes can be scary. Sometimes that can be terrifying for so many people. Getting in front of a camera and just speaking their mind and their hearts. The Bible says what comes out of your mouth is probably in your heart. Not probably, it is from your heart. And I question that, not the Bible, but I question myself in that. Like, what am I thinking now? And these words that are coming out of my mouth, is this coming from my heart? This is how I feel. Am I emotionally tied to some of the things that I'm saying, right? And the truth is, if we'll read the scriptures correctly, it is just that. And like I just said, I'm being outworked, and you are probably being outworked too. So, in order for us not to be outworked, we got to learn how to create better content. It's just that simple. You have to learn how to uh, create a hook, they say. And then that hook is supposed to draw people in to want to know more, right? And then you give them a cliffhanger to want to come back. And I'm like, how is that possible when I'm talking about how to get started in business, how to become a real estate agent, how to survive in the world of real estate as a agent, which I wrote a book about, which is on Amazon, which you guys could go pick up and find out what it took for me to be in the business 21 years later, throughout my first transaction, because that book is about my first transaction, and it is called How to Survive the First Year in Real Estate. And I kind of walk you guys through a scenario of my first deal. Almost all of the realtors that I know for all this time always have a story about their first deal. One of my friends told me a crazy story about her first deal when she first got into real estate. She graduated high school. They weren't in a position to be able to send her parents to send her to college. And she had to get into something that was going to allow her to kind of make some money, right? She didn't want to be in a situation that her parents found themselves in. And she wondered, what was she going to do? And it was sales. And it just so happened someone introduced her to the world of real estate, or suggested, and she got into real estate. She didn't have a car. All she had was a bike. She didn't have the most fanciest clothes. She had no connections to anybody in real estate, right? She's just a kid coming out of high school. Who's going to trust them with her with one of the biggest decisions that they would ever make? Excuse let's say it again. Who is going to trust you, even you, with one of the biggest decisions that person, that family will ever make? Parents making those decisions for the kids, right? Husband and wife making that decision before they start the family, right? And it is the place where you are going to live. And here I am, or here you are, or here she was, with no experience, just coming out of high school kid, not having any money, feeling bad because she wasn't able to go to college. And some of the kids that she went to high school with went off to college, right? So she took up some courses and got her license. And when she got her license, she went out and told everybody about what she was doing. And I remember that myself. When I first got my real estate license, I was out of college, right? I was just getting out of college. And I was doing some little side jobs for tips. And I met the woman that would become my wife in class. And I thought I was living in a little rinky-dink apartment that was college worthy in terms of what it cost me, the expenses of it. And yeah, I wanted to take care of myself better, and I wanted to take care of this now woman that was in my life better, who was, thank God, in the business of real estate, who said to me, "Why don't you try to sell houses?" And I took that and I ran with that. And again, where I was, my situation was, I'm just out of college. I don't know anybody. I have no idea where to start, who to talk to. Most of the people that could buy a house at that time, they didn't look like me. And the ones that could, that looked like me, for sure at that time, were not trusting me. Right. So, what was I going to do? Just the same way with this young lady. What was she going to do? Here's what happened to her. And then I'll tell you about what happened to me. She found someone who gave her a chance. Right. She was calling on the phone. She calls herself to this day a cold calling queen, right? She'll make 100 phone calls a week trying to find someone who would like to buy real estate or sell real estate, right? And so she said to me, she said, "Chuck, I started calling everybody that I possibly could. And then I got an appointment for someone who wanted to sell their house." Now, here's the crazy part about all of that, right? So, how was she going to get to the people's home? Right? How is she going to get all of these materials that she had compiled about what was happening in the neighborhood based on the training that they gave her in the real estate office? She had to create a CMA, which is a comparable market analysis, which is a book that you bring that talks about all of the sold houses, the houses that sold in the neighborhood within a certain period of time that you get to alter and create. And then it talks about what's pending, which means what is being sold, actively being sold in the moment, right? That is in escrow. We have escrows here in California. So what is in escrow at the time, and what is just sitting on the market, what just came to the market, what the price points are, the sizes of the houses, the neighborhoods, the location, all of those things factor into this book of a situation called a CMA. And it could get pretty hefty, right? So, how was she going to get all of this material over to this client of hers, right? Where she was going to stand in front of them or sit down somehow in front of whomever this client was and pitch herself, sell her and her non skills, right, on these people who again are making one of the biggest decisions of their lives, right? She said, "Chuck, I had to ride a bike to their house." She said, "And I ditched the bike behind a neighbor's house so they would not see me coming up on a pedal bike," right? Not even a motorcycle, right? A pedal bike. And she said, "And I went in there, I was nervous, and they questioned me and my experience." And she said, "I was just honest. I just told them the truth about myself." And she said, "And they gave me a shot." And she said, and they were leaving at the time that she was just finishing up on her spill about who she was and what she was going to do and all of the steps that she was going to take in order to sell their property, right? She said they went to go to the car and she had to leave as quickly as she possibly could before they came out. And she said it was tough. And then she had to get on her bike and pedal out of the neighborhood. She didn't live in the neighborhood, but she had to pedal that bike with that CMA and all of her information out of the neighborhood with her now contract because she got a signed deal. My God, can you imagine that happening to you on your first deal, right? She was able to close that deal. And the moment she closed that deal, she got that money in the bank. She ran over and bought herself a little hoop de ville, right? A little piece of a car in order for her to get to her next appointment and her next appointment and her next appointment. Now, she had the motivation already, right? Because they were poor. She didn't get to go to college, right? And she didn't want to feel that sting of, okay, now her friends now are graduating college and they're coming home. And what could she say? What was she to tell them? Well, she put herself in a position to help them find their first properties or find their first apartments, because as real estate people, we also find leases for people, leasing of home, leasing of apartment, or whatever. So she could help her friends out in that way. And she was a cold calling queen, as I mentioned. So she could sit on the phone for hours and hours and hours and hours and make calls. And she did. And because she picked up those skills and she wasn't afraid of getting in front of people who would actually take her call and give her a shot at representing them on one side of the coin or the other, whether that be the buyer side or whether that was on the sales side of it, the listing side where you represent the property. She was able to convince one person after the next, after the next, after the next, and after some hard work, right? I'm pretty sure she has like some calluses or something in her ears from all of the phone calls that she definitely had to make in order to build a business. And 20 years later, she's still on the phones, 100 calls or better a week. And she is on fire, but she worked her way and built her way and pushed through all of the things that we have to push through as real estate professionals in order to be where she is today. And so proud of her. Just a great story. My story was a little different. I had a mentor, and my mentor would allow me to work some of the properties that she had on the market. I wrote the book about it, so I'm not going to give up too much of it. I hope you guys will go out to Amazon and pick up the book, How to Survive Your First Year in Real Estate, from Charles Rucker, on Amazon, right? So my mentor, right? I was assigned a mentor when I signed up to join my first real estate brokerage. The first one denied me, told me that hedge for this, right? And this is a true story. The manager of the office at that particular time was one of the major corporate brokerages. Was a friend of mine, a friend of my wife's. Said to me when I came over to ask him if I could sit down and have an appointment with him. I had gotten my real estate license, or I was about to get him. I had taken the test already, and I was just waiting. I passed the test. I was just waiting for the state of California to issue my license, my number. When I went to ask for an interview to sit down and talk to him, he said to me, before we even could sit down and talk about it, he said to me, something along these lines: I've never hired a black man. And rest his, bless his heart, because we were pretty close relationship after that, and I understood. But what he was saying is, go down to a younger, more inviting, more friendly environment where people of all different races are hanging out. And that was a real estate brokerage that was equally relevant and had a good reputation, and a very strong brokerage that was just down the street. And I did. And my wife just so happened to know the manager of that office as well. And we all set up an appointment for me. And I went down and I had a conversation, and I got hired. Now, the crazy thing about that was, on the first day when I went to sit down in the manager's office, we had a great conversation. But he told me at that time, because I had this big Kool-Aid smile, like you see, I still hold it today. He said to me, "You got to get rid of that." He said, "It looks like you got a glass jaw." And I said, "I didn't quite understand that." I said, "What do you mean?" He says, "That's you gotta get rid of the glass jaw." And I guess he was being politically correct, right? As he is the manager, right? And those kind of words could lead to some trouble. I don't think it's something that you say to everybody, but I got the point. And that was to kind of tone down the smile so much, because friendliness in business, this big Kool-Aid smile, could send the wrong kind of message to somebody who I may have been asking them to represent their property, right? I may have been asking them to represent them on the biggest purchase of their lives, right? And if I got this big smile on my face and someone comes to entertain or to put in an offer on the property and say the agent on the other side of that buyer situation was seasoned, which many of them were, which was the first brokerage that I went to, years in the game, skin in the game, right? What if they presented an offer to me and something came up, whereas they caught my greenness, being a little green behind the ears, and they just manhandled me, and I would not represent my client properly in terms of the negotiation of a property, right? He didn't want me to be intimidated, and he didn't want me to be taken not seriously because I always carry this giant smile on my face, right? I got it, and I understood it, and I used those tips. And then he said to me, find somebody, a group, or someone that you like in the office. So I want you to come in the office every day, right? In a real estate office, you're not required to come to the office every day. But he wanted me to come to the office every day and just get a feel for the office. It was my first sales job at that level, right? In the real estate market, where I think at that time the average property price was about $400,000 to $500,000. Cool, right? This was some years ago too. So those same properties today are way priced way above that, maybe even double, if I'm not mistaken. That's just how times are now. It's a tough place to live. For affordability, and it seems that way across the country, that we're having those kind of issues across the country with housing. So with that being said, I said, let me study everybody in the office. And I did. I came and I sat down. They had a community or a communal space where if you didn't have a computer at that time, I didn't even have a laptop, right? Most of us didn't have a laptop. So there were these communal computers that you could go in and you would sit down, and your job was at that particular time to search the inventory. And what that means is you had to search out in a database called the MLS, right? The multiple listing service. You had to go into spend some time looking, reviewing properties. And there were certain days of the week that the realtors would get together. Yes, it was called a caravan. We would all jump in a car together and we would go look at the new properties that were being brought to the market for the first time before the public got to see them. And we would do that. We would go and have a good time, hang out with one another, shake hands, rub elbows, have food, because a lot of the realtors doing a broker's open at that time would serve lunch, some of the most amazing lunch. In some places, we had this place called the Green Street that they made these unforgettable salads, right? And just the sandwiches, and mostly things that you could actually go and have a good lunch for free. And a lot of us at that time were broke. We weren't getting any money. Real estate is always and has always been, depending on the brokerage you are in. I mean, the major brokerages, the main brokerages that you hear of, they're 100% commission. So if you don't sell something, you're not eating. And even when you're selling something, you're going to wait 30 to 45 to 60 to 90 days in order to get a paycheck. Yeah, man. It's going to take you a while to get a check. So you go to the open houses, you get to walk around the properties, you get to see what crown molding is and see what kind of terracotta or the kind of, yeah, exactly, the marble, the travertine, the tiles, and all of these different linoleum and all of these just different things that people put in a home. right? You see parquet floors, you see oak wood, maple, and all of these things that people do to design the homes that they live in, right? You design your home to be your heaven, right? Your space away from the outside world. And however that is, you get to paint the walls the color you want if you own it. And you get to design it and put the materials that you like into your place, right? And hang a chandelier, put an island in the kitchen if you got the space for it. And that's what the caravan was about. That was what studying and learning what different properties were about, knowing where the property was. If somebody was saying, you come across somebody that, hey, I sell real estate that you have told, and now they're calling on you to maybe help them out, represent them, right? You know where a property that fit whatever it is that their requirements were, you knew exactly where to take them because you were gone on caravans and you were sitting in that communal space studying that MLS so you could know what your inventory was. Now, here's the thing, it's like that in sales now. If you own anything, or if you're working for anybody, if you're working in a car dealership, if you're working in a store somewhere, clothing store, retail, whatever, you got to know what your inventory is. And then you got to know your market. And then you got to know the demographics in your marketplace, right? Who makes up the communities? What kind of work do they do? What's the median income in the community? Who is, da 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 da, and on and on and on. You need to know these things, and you need to keep your finger on the pulse. You need to know where the party is, where the grocery store is, maybe the rating of the schools. How's the rating of the neighborhood in terms of safety, so on and so forth. Thing that you can hint on, but ultimately it's up to those who are living or going to be living in the neighborhood to know that information. But it's nice when you can kind of lead them and guide them to where they can get that information, or you can help them out a little bit by giving them some of that information. You had to know when the school events were, sponsor a few things, give a rally, a raffle, that is, right? Maybe do a rally, go to the football games. If you had kids, talk to the parents as you come and go from school. Maybe there's an event at the school, and you just go and you be present in your church and anywhere and everywhere you could connect to people to talk to them about what it is that you do and what your intentions were and what you were willing to do in order to help them realize a dream, realize a goal, sell a property, right? Acquire a property, investment properties. I knew some guys that owned 200-300 properties, 50 to 60 properties, right? Doors, they call them today. These were people many, many decades ago who, some of them, to be honest, had like 6th grade educations. They were gardeners. They did housekeeping. I had a couple that one was a gardener, one was a hospital bed. She made the beds in the hospital and turned the beds over in the hospital. But they had like a good 10 to 20 real estate properties. Yeah, 6th grade education, but they knew real estate. They were foreigners, immigrants that came to the country with nothing, just a dream to be here. And they acquired so many properties. And I was just so fortunate to be able to represent them and help them. And that's how I got started in the business. And that's how I learned. Doing open houses is how I got my first listing. And all the way full circle back to my first listing. After my mentor would take me over to different open houses to stand in the open house and greet buyers, potential clients, potential buyers or sellers that would come through the property that I was holding open on the weekend. Because my mentor had other things to do. She wanted to go acquire more listings, more business for her book of business, right? More clients for her book of business. I had a seller come over to an open house that I was holding. And as I'm holding the open house, at the end of it, the couple walked around and kind of hung out in the house that I was holding open for a while. And I was saying, I wonder why they're just kind of hanging out, right? What's going on? So I reapproached them after greeting them and them not telling me why they were there, just for comparison rights, right? Comparing the property that I was holding open to the property that they owned, right? At the end of my open house where I was closing up, they were still hanging out. The gentleman was a husband and wife, asked me to come down to his house, and he wanted to talk to me about the possibility of representing him in the sale of his property. Blew my top, you guys. Blew my mind. I was like so shocked. Like, what do you mean? Okay, yes, absolutely. What do I do? Right? Nervous, but I've been doing it for a while because my mentor was pretty active, but I was just holding open houses. I wasn't actually talking about negotiating contracts and percentages on what it would cost the seller in order to employ me and for my services, for me to do my own open houses at that time, right? So I was really nervous, but I tried to call my mentor, and I couldn't get a hold of her until I really ended the open house, and she showed up, and I let her know that I was going to be walking about 4 houses down, and if she could come with me so I could talk to the seller of this property, maybe, just maybe, I could secure my first listing agreement. And I did. But it came with some wild stuff. So we go into the man's house, talk to his wife. He has a son that's living in the property that I had an issue with at some point because he had no idea that his parents were thinking about selling the house. And he was the type of son who had done nothing with his life, and he was already above his 30s and just kind of hanging out, right? And they didn't tell him that they were going to be selling the house. So I would have to deal with that at some point by letting him know, oh, by the way, your parents are going to be selling your house. Can you imagine that? So we look around the house, we assess the house by going from room to room, having the seller point out certain things to myself and my mentor. We were taking notes as I was following her direction about what the ceiling could look like if there was a little paint, what a new faucet may look like to someone who may want to buy the house, right? To bring more value or to solidify whatever the price that we agreed upon that the seller would be asking for. So we did that. At the end of it, we all left, dispersed. My mentor went her way. I went home for the night. It was a long day, but one thing crazy happened to me. And how can I even say it? Well, here it is. My mentor decided to go get another girl, another realtor from our office who was a friend of hers, who they had worked deals together, both of them about 20 years in the business, swings back around to the house to do a second assessment. And to the owner's surprise, he was not expecting them to come over to his place again. He let them in. They walked around the place and they gave him their assessment of the property, cutting me out of the deal completely, or so they thought they would be doing. I get a call that night. This was about 8 o'clock at night. The seller asked me who I was working for. I said, I'm working for myself. He says, are you working for the woman that came over the first time with you to look at my house? And I said, I don't work for that woman. That woman is my mentor. And he said to me, she had better not be your boss. Woo! Okay, what was this all about? What was this coming from? What am I supposed to do with this information? Well, I'll tell you, folks, it turned out that she was banned from coming into the property, even for the open houses. I almost lost the listing because they did invite me over to sign the listing. I had to renegotiate or really fight for, that is, the percentage in terms of what I would be making. And at that time, what the buyer's agent who brought the buyer to purchase the property would be making, because there's a split there. And I had to fight for that. And I got my ear chewed up a lot, because this man had an attitude, and this man had a little spice to him, right? So it was very interesting. And about a weekend, the man asked me, after doing my first open house, it was about a week on the market, why had I not sold his house yet? Now, I had veteran agents, 20 years, saying to us, or saying to me, that they had tried to sell this man's house for years, and he was just not a nice guy, but he gave me a shot. And he questioned my abilities after 1 week. It took 16 days for me to get that house sold, and it happened on a fluke. A man was walking down the street, and his sister-in-law lived in the neighborhood, and he wanted to be closer to his family, and he was just so happened to be looking for a house. And I asked one day, he walked by and asked me as I was leaving the house, would it be okay for him to come inside of the house and look at it? And I said, I don't know about that, because of who the owner was. But I asked him to wait for me for a second. This guy was on foot walking down the street. And so, not even driving. And so I go back in the house and I asked the owner if it would be okay. The owner said, yes, absolutely. Bring the man in. I brought him in. He looked around the property. He said to me, I got your information. My real estate agent will be in touch with you. So he had already had a real estate agent. He had already had his loan paperwork together. He had already acquired a loan, and he was just ready to pounce. And that is God, the man upstairs. There's no other way to put it. There's no other way to think of it. There's no other way for me in my heart that could have ever happened. And it got really colorful around this situation. Okay. With the kid that I mentioned, I had a car accident on the way to getting my first open house done. I had the seller leave the house because I wasn't there on time, and they had somewhere to be for a weekend. And here I am, just trying to keep it all together. But I got that house sold, y'all. Go check out my book on Amazon, How to Survive Your First Year in Real Estate, and get a laugh and really learn something. All right. I'm Chuck Rucker, Ruck's Places the podcast, man. Thank you guys for hanging out with me and listening to this crazy story. And I'll catch you guys on the next episode. Until then, peace, guys. Kool-Aid smile.